guys, it's Danny. Welcome to a brand new episode of our Orchid Care for Beginners series 2024. Yes, we have been renewed for another season. How about that? And this season will be extra good because I have an idea. How about we make this season all about the practical approach? No theories, practical approach. What happens if or when ... All sorts of instances. I'm gonna tell you and show you what happens when bad stuff happens to our orchids, and I'll also tell you how to fix it. Most of the times, everything is fixable. And today, we're kicking off the series with what happens when you do not repot your brand new orchid. Say hello to my best friend's orchid. I actually gifted her this orchid last year, and it doesn't look good. I actually gifted it without repotting because I knew at some point I will take it back and repot it, and that point arrived because what I see in the medium, and actually she noticed it and she told me she's a little concerned, what I see here is a lot of mold, and that spells only one thing: potting mix is done. It needs to be removed ASAP, and I'm gonna tell you why. So before we start, as always, today's episode, together with this entire beautiful series, is sponsored by rePotme.com, who offers you the best possible products and solutions for your orchids, from potting mixes, since we're gonna talk a lot about potting mixes today, to pots, fertilizers, accessories, and everything in between. And not only for orchids, but also for other houseplants as well, such as cacti and succulents. So I'll link you to their website down below. Feel free to take a look at any time. I am collaborating with rePotme for 5 to 6 years at this point, even before we started this series, and yeah, it has been a joy, and I'm so happy we got renewed for another season. I'll also link you to the products that I keep using and that I like, again in the description. So with all of that said, let us now focus on this little orchid. So this is a beautiful Phalaenopsis orchid. It's one of those fragrant hybrids that invaded the market last year, in Europe at least, and it is gorgeous. It smells beautiful, it's gorgeous, but as all or most orchids we purchase from the flower shops, it did not arrive in the freshest and maybe the best quality potting mix. One thing you should always keep in mind is that the orchids you find in flower shops with flowers and that look beautiful, they're already established in that potting mix and pot for at least about 2 years. The potting mix you purchase them in is already old. Sometimes you can still draw some life out of it, and this orchid was absolutely fine for maybe a year or so, a little less than a year, but at some point that potting mix will start to break down, and when that happens, it will release byproducts and all sorts of substances which are really not okay for the roots, for the brand new roots either. They will acidify the environment. Think about something that is rotting. Is it pleasant? No. Well, that's exactly what happens in this pot. So sooner rather than later, I always suggest to everybody to repot their new orchids. I get it that they're so beautiful and you enjoy the blooms, and you can actually enjoy the blooms if you assess the potting mix and everything is okay. But then maybe after a couple of months, it's such a great idea to repot your orchid so you don't end up in this situation. Now, this situation is already a little past due time for a repot. I see the mold, but worse than that, I do see some dead roots, some mushy roots inside this potting mix. And the worst thing of all is that the orchid will not really tell you something's wrong until it's way too late. When you see your orchid starting to have wrinkles in its leaves, no matter how much you water it, that's way beyond way too late. So that's the bad side. You can see this orchid looks absolutely fine up top. It doesn't have shrivelly leaves, it's nice and perky. But here, oh brother, what we have here. And sometimes these orchids are sold in opaque pots, or pots that have like a wrapping, a plastic wrapping on the outside, so you cannot really see inside. That's the worst. If you have an orchid like that, you know, don't wait until you see signs. Just repot it sooner rather than later, or remove that plastic wrapping if you can, so you take a look inside. Remember, the potting mix you purchase your orchid in is already old. How old? Nobody knows. How much life you can squeeze out of it? Again, nobody knows. It's a lottery. Maybe a year, maybe 2, maybe 0 days. And also, the orchid will not give you signs until it's already way too late. It can still actually be in bloom, and it could be way too late. So, If you find yourself in this situation, the next thing you need to do is absolutely repot your orchid. This is a very happy case because the orchid is still okay and the majority of the roots I suspect are okay, but we have a lot of dead roots inside, and dead roots spell acceleration of breaking down of the medium, acceleration of other roots or new roots being damaged, so we need to intervene right away. So I'll get myself my potting tray and I'll come back with a pot and a potting mix. Alright, so I got you in a little closer. No need to see my face for this procedure. My husband used up my joke. So I got myself a brand new pot. I'm gonna treat my friend with a rePotme pot. Guys, I have these pots for like, what, 5 years at this point? When did I make that video? I've had them outside, I've had them inside. I've used them ever since, and look at that. They're still flexible. There is no sun or UV damage. So, got my pot with extra ventilation slots, and I also have a mix here which is appropriate for our area. First and foremost, let us unpot the orchid. I'm actually going to get rid of these guys because they're kind of old as well. As you can tell, my orchid pot is already soaked. It's a good idea to pre-soak your orchid prior to unpotting it just to make the roots more flexible. Mine is already soaked, so I'm not going to do that now. And I will warn you, I'm not entirely sure how much I will speak during this process because I can already detect the mold smell and I just don't like to inhale that. So what I'm going to do is just press gently on the pot. Pull the orchid up. And look at that. Oh boy. We also had a plug at the base here, which is the seedling plug, the seedling medium. It has never been removed, so the orchid has never been repotted, but up-potted. Okay, so I removed the vast majority of the potting mix. I'm gonna clean my tray because I just cannot handle the smell anymore, and I'll come back when I'm done. I will sanitize my tray with some rubbing alcohol. Do not spray this stuff on the roots, it will damage them, but you can spray it on the surfaces to sanitize them. I will use my trusty rePotme not scissors, pruners. I will also disinfect, or rather sanitize them. There we go. I'll let the alcohol evaporate, and now let's take a look-see. I will keep this pot. I will clean it up and keep it because it's a plastic pot. It can be reused. I don't know how much life it still has, but yeah, as long as it doesn't crack, it's still okay. A little side note, the pots the orchid come in are not typically the best of quality. You can definitely reuse them, and you should, but especially when exposed to the sun, they become so brittle. Look at this one. This is not usable anymore. I did use it for a while, but I think its life is done. Whereas something like this from rePotme is treated against UV and it should last you longer, even if exposed to sunshine. Alrighty, so we can see that we have quite a few dead roots here. They're mushy, there's no substance in them. There's only the string left behind. We need to cut all of these, and still the smell is pretty bad. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut these from up top, from the base, as fast as I can, so I can rinse the roots of this orchid. Alrighty, so I left on the orchid the roots that are still quote-unquote green. They don't have to be green, they can be silvery. The roots that are still stiff, they have substance to them. Sometimes you will find a section, I'll try to give you a close-up, that has some segments missing. That is okay. Actually, Phalaenopsis orchids can hold on to these roots. They can function very, very well. Other orchids don't do this, but Phalaenopsis do. So leave those roots be. If the bottom side is mushy, yeah, you can cut it away. But if the bottom side is still good and green, even if there is a segment missing, it's absolutely fine. Let it be. Just found another mushy root here. So I'm also going to try to remove more of this old potting mix as possible. And the next thing that I'm gonna do is go to the sink and just rinse the roots. Nothing special, only the roots, not the entire orchid. I'm just gonna rinse them just so I remove more of this medium. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Clean again my tray and come back with some hydrogen peroxide 3%. Alright, so we're back. I rinsed the roots. I didn't show you, but you didn't miss anything. It was the quickest rinse ever. You can even skip this step, to be fair, if you want. But I like to remove all of those tiny, tiny pieces of medium. What you shouldn't skip is the next step. Hydrogen peroxide 3%, the one you can find at the pharmacy, the one you can purchase in those big bottles. I like to put it in a spray bottle and spray the entire root system. Again, only the root system, not the leaves or anything, just to remove all of the spores from the mold and whatever mold residue I might still have. Rinsing at the sink doesn't really kill off the mold, but hydrogen peroxide 3% does. I don't suggest you use higher volumes or higher concentrations rather than 3%, even though at the pharmacies you can find 6%. If you find 6% only, dilute it with preferably distilled water, 1 part to 1 part, and you will get a 3% concentration. But if it's 3%, use it straight from the bottle. I find that a spray bottle works best. So I'm gonna apply it at the base of the stem, not on top, just at the base, and just on the roots. Now, from here on, you will hear a fizz, and that's good, that's great. It means it's working. So after this, you don't have to rinse, you don't have to do anything. You can just let it be with the hydrogen peroxide on top. I don't even go like remove the hydrogen peroxide from my tray. It's fine. It can sit here. So afterwards, let us prepare our brand new pot. Let's talk a little bit about the potting mix. Always when you repot orchids, especially new ones, use fresh potting mix. Don't reuse the potting mix we just threw away. Sometimes the potting mix will not be in such a bad condition. Don't reuse it, it's gonna get there sooner rather than later. And as much as possible, I would strongly advise you to use some good quality potting mix. Sadly, on the market you will find what I believe to be not so suitable potting mixes. And I did speak about this in other videos. If you find a potting mix that has bark chips and like a sort of a peat mix in it as well, try to stay away from that. It's a little too fine, a little too much for these roots. These guys are epiphytic. This orchid really enjoys its air. And sadly, most of the more inexpensive options on the market I find unsuitable. If you can find either these materials separately, like bark separately and leca separately and sphagnum moss separately, and do your own mixture and stuff, that'd be great. You can, with my hand on my heart, you can use the RePotme mixes. They're absolutely fantastic. They're better quality. They should last you longer. Again, you can check my video on using them. When I was privileged enough to be able to import them, I tried them. I'm not anymore, the rules have changed, so I have to use something else. So as much as possible, good quality potting mixes will just last you longer. What type of potting mix you should use? It will have to be a bit of a trial and error, but I would suggest if you live in a cooler or maybe rather more humid environment, go with a mix that has more bark or hydrogen or things that don't retain water, things that are rather airy. And if you live in warmer climates, drier climates, deserty climates, even if you're inside your home, you know, the climate outside will affect your home as well. I would suggest you go for mixtures that have some water retention, like sphagnum moss. Now, we do live in a very warm area, so I'm gonna use a mixture of bark and sphagnum moss. This will give me aeration, but also some water retention. And if you go on the RePotme page, you will see that there are, I think, 3 mixes currently for Phalaenopsis. Yes, they are all good, but you will see some have more sphagnum moss, some not. They cater for different environments. So just have a general idea about how your environment is and try the one you think is best. But typically it is, to some extent, a bit of a trial and error. Not to worry though, if you go a little bit too dry, you can just water more often. So if you're not sure, pick the potting mix with the least sphagnum moss. Now, the peat mixes you can find on the market, they're really, in my opinion, really hard to control. I could get away with them because I have experience, but beginners, I don't know, they're so hard to control. All of that peat can accumulate on the bottom or block the air pockets, so I find them to be quite tricky. Even sphagnum moss, I think, is better than those peat moss mixes. So what I'm gonna do now is start with a layer of potting mix on the bottom, and then I will arrange my orchid inside the pot, and it is a perfect fit. Look at that. So I'm gonna try to arrange it kind of at the same level where it used to be, and then I'm just going to add the potting mix around the roots. And yes, the sphagnum moss makes things a little bit more tricky to arrange, but it's okay. It's very good for our area. I'm going to show you how to make everything fall down better. So I'm gonna put this layer of potting mix, even if it's not very homogeneous. And now, because I have extremely big air pockets, I'm gonna have to use a bamboo skewer. Just insert it on the side of the pot, making sure I don't stab the roots. Just wiggle it a little bit on the sides. And this will make the bark pieces just fall down. Sphagnum moss can be a bit of a nuisance to work with, especially when it's dry, and I was just too lazy to wet mine. You should pre-soak it to work easier with it, but it's okay. So sphagnum moss can make it so the bark doesn't go all the way down to the pot, but if you use this bamboo skewer and wiggle it on the sides, everything will be okay. The top of the mix will be bark. In our area, if I leave sphagnum moss on the top, I get a lot of cyanobacteria. I'm not gonna get into the details of that, but it's not good. It's a photosynthetic bacteria, which is not good. So what I like to do is top my mixture with bark, not sphagnum moss. This is an advanced thing we're doing here. You don't have to do it, especially if you're a beginner. But I know my area. We're an island, and yeah, there are some particularities here in my area that I need to take into account for a better life with orchids. But yeah, this is just something we do here. You don't have to top it off with bark, but I like to. And here we have it, our orchid is potted. Now you might notice that this potting mix is not very compacted. If I insert a finger and push, can you see how low it goes? And it can go lower than that, but I don't wanna. I tried to keep this mixture and the sphagnum moss fluffy. And that's the key to success. Sphagnum moss, it will retain water, but it doesn't have to be compacted, or you don't have to have a large quantity to retain a lot of water. It can be like this. Just put it like this in the pot, and that's it. Don't compress it. And that's exactly what I did here. I want water retention because we live in a hot area, but I also want air, which is provided by the bark and also these fluffy, let's say, air pockets that I left. And there we have it. This is my orchid done. If you're an absolute beginner, you know, take into account all of the things I said, but don't necessarily try to copy me. These things will come with experience. You might not have to go for such a sandwich as I did here. It all depends on your area and, of course, on your experience. The less experience you have, the better it is for you to keep it simple. Hence why a pre-made mix would be better. If you like to mix your own potting mix, you know, you can get the materials separately and make your own mix. But again, that's for more advanced growers, which, you know, we've already gone through a few years of growing orchids in our environments, and we kind of know what we should look for. But there we have it. Our orchid is potted, and pretty much that is it. You do not have to do anything from here on, other than take care of the orchid properly. So let me clean a little my table, get into the frame as well, and we'll do the outro, shall we? Let's shall. All right, so here we are. Our orchid is potted. The next thing that I'm gonna do is water it. The way that I will water it is at the sink. I'm just gonna run some water through the pot because we have quite a bit of sphagnum moss. There is no need for me to soak it. Additionally, there is one more thing that I will do because I know my friend has a very, very busy life and I don't wanna complicate it further than I already do. I will add slow release fertilizer. Now, it is very important to fertilize your orchids. You can use the easiest method, the water soluble fertilizer. You can use the granulated form, such as the one that I use. It goes a long way, but if you have just a few orchids, you can get the already liquid one. Or if you don't have time, you can also go for slow release fertilizer. And MSU, my favorite fertilizer, has a slow release version, which I think is great. And if you know yourself and you know that you will not keep up with fertilizing, I suggest you use slow release fertilizer. Now, how do we do this? When we repot, you can do it before you add the top layer, but if you're already, you know, done with the thing, what you can do is create a little bit of a, not hole, but a little space here and just work it in. make it just like I showed you with the bamboo skewer. Put these beads around the roots, but don't let them sit at the top because the top will be dry. So work them in. You need to put them in the first section of the pot, like this first section or the middle, but not the top, because these are orchids and this potting mix does not act like soil. So, you know, you don't have to do this. If you prefer your liquid fertilizer, just use that one. I think that for my friend, the slow release fertilizer is the better option, so she doesn't have to feel bad when she skips fertilizing for a month. Do you? Well, now you can. I know you're gonna love this. Alrighty, so I worked in these beads of fertilizer. And you know, you can put, like, for this type of pot, a pinch like this. How many you can get in between your fingers, that is enough, especially if you're using from time to time the liquid fertilizer as well. It's okay, you can use both. And we are pretty much done. Now, this one doesn't fit back into the decorative container. I am going to provide her with a new one, and we are pretty much done. From here on, your orchid should pretty much start to grow vegetatively. If it's warm outside, it might decide to put out a flower spike, which, you know what? I don't know. I think maybe this one might want to. It's still pretty cool here in our region. It might decide to put out a flower spike this year. It might not. You can see it's growing a brand new leaf. It's vegetatively growing. It depends. It really doesn't matter if your orchid will bloom or not, because right now we just saved it, or saved its root system, and that's what matters. If it doesn't bloom this year, it will bloom next year, it's fine. So this is what happens when you do not repot your brand new orchid. And as I was saying, I strongly suggest that you do repot your orchids into fresh medium sooner rather than later. We managed to catch this orchid in time, but some orchids are not that lucky. Sometimes that potting mix breaks down so fast and so abruptly that the entire root system can completely be wiped out, case in which it's gonna be a little bit more difficult to revive those orchids. Righty, so that said, that's about it for today. I hope this video is useful for you. If you have ideas for this year's series, let me know. I already have a few ideas planned, but if you want to suggest some ideas for this series, what happens when or if, let me know in the comment. I am all ears. And I thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much RePotme for sponsoring yet another year of this series. And with that said, I'll see you all next time. Bye!